Riprendiamo i lavori di ieri, che visto gli argomenti e visto anche i relatori, penso sarà un'altra mezza giornata così interessante come era stata la giornata. Ricordo che per ragioni di viaggio Mrs. Mary Pille non ne ha potuto parlare ieri e parlerà stamani come terzo relatore dopo la pausa caffè. Quindi si comincia con Heinz, Battocchio, Heinz, Gullino, Vladimiro Valerio e Andrea Cantile a finire nella mattinata. Quindi inviterei senz'altro Markus Heinz di potersi accomodare per la sua relazione. Il nostro oratore di stamani è della Staatsbibliothek zu Berlin, Preussischer Kulturbesitz, grosso modo la biblioteca statale del patrimonio culturale prussiano a Berlino. Grazie. L'argomento sarà Cartography in Nuremberg in the middle of the 18th century, che è una grafica di Norimberga dal 400, per non essere accecato. Abbiamo quindi con l'inserimento della signora abbiamo un qualche piccolo problema di tempo, per cui pregherei gli oratori di voler stare in mezz'ora con qualche piccolo margine di...
Grazie. Thank you for the invitation to speak here in nice Venice. I'm sorry I don't speak Italian, so I have to give my presentation in English, which is quite a pity with a beautiful language, not being able to speak it. Well, why I'm here, according to his own accounts, Rizzi Zannoni probably was working in Germany in the years 1756, 57, maybe 58 or 59, but probably 1756 and 57. There are 8 maps altogether which were published in Germany, 1 by Seuter and 7 by the Homenaires, between 1757 and 1766. That's what we know. And he more than once stresses that he has a close collaboration with the Cosmographical Society based in Nuremberg and later in Göttingen, and even says he was a professor of this society. That's what he himself says. My research was concentrated on the Hohmann publishing firm in Nuremberg, which lived from 1702 to 1848, so it's quite in the middle of the history of this firm, where Rizzi Zannoni might have showed up there. And the name Rizzi Zannoni was on my list of names, which I checked during my archival studies and in the libraries and so on. Unfortunately, almost never his name showed up. It is very, very difficult to find any additional information apart from the maps in German archives, and well, the publications in the libraries are there, but that's what we already knew. So Professor Valerio and I agreed that it still might make sense to compare what we know or what he himself says about his German time with what we know, what we definitely know, what was going on at the place where he said to be, especially in the Nuremberg, in the Hohmann firm. And so what I can do today is more interpretation than real proved data. I'm sorry for this, but it can't be changed. These are the places where Rizzi Zannoni has a resemblance to in Germany. It starts in the north with Oldenburg, where he is supposed to have done some surveys, some mapping in 1756 on behalf of the Danish. He then went to Nuremberg, where he probably showed up in 1756, if at all. And from there, there's some connection to Göttingen, where was a member of the Academy of Science from 1765 to his death. And much later, to speak in the sequence of this conference, after Mary Pedler's talk, he went back from Paris back to Italy, and there was a big plan for a land survey in Bavaria in 1776. So these are the states of his German activities. The first thing we know is this map that is published by Albrecht Karl Seuter, the son of the famous Matthäus Seuter in Augsburg. Rizzi Zannoni is said to have been working on surveys and land survey and mapping in Oldenburg and Delmenhorst on behalf of the Danish crown. I talked to Michael Ritter, who is the specialist on the Augsburg map publishers, and apart from this map, there's absolutely no notice of Rizzi Zannoni in Augsburg and with the Seuter publishing house. So it's the same as I experienced in Nuremberg. It doesn't show up. So and this map is a first mystery. Rizzi Zannoni was about 21 years old when in 1757 this map was published. And on the map there is a triangulation network. And I'm sorry for the bad picture. I just took it out of the whole map, so it's not that good. And it soon afterwards was heavily criticized as being unrealistic by some Oldenburg specialists, and said you can't measure this because you can't see from point A to point B. There is no sight from these points. And soon afterwards, Rizzi Zannoni on another map from Paris declared that this was not his work, this was not true, this was, he said, that's not my thing, it is. What we don't know is who invented the wrong triangulation network. It's highly probably that Albrecht Karl Seuter did this because he was not a very scientific publisher. So, sorry, can you hear me properly with the microphone? Okay. And it might have been fashionable at the time when the Carte de France was appearing to have triangulation networks on the maps. So it might have been, he might have added some features just to make the map look more scientific. On the other hand, the Seuter publishing house was not very renowned for scientific publications, and probably was a pressure from the Hohmann firm, which had scientific publications, and he said, okay, we have to do something with that respect too. Well, on the other hand, modern specialists on the history of maps of Oldenburg also already said maybe the Rizzi Zannoni never had any things to do with Oldenburg, but this is not probable to my opinion. Oh, you can't read it. In the cartouche, he is named as the author of the map. And why should an Augsburg publisher, well, suggest an author of a map whom nobody knew at the time? He was 20 years old. He had published nothing apart from this map. This was the first publication. So if he had said, okay, this is a publication of De Lille or whatever, it might have made sense. It would have been wrong. But to make it completely up, in my opinion, doesn't make any sense for the Seuter publishing house. So there must be have been some material Rizzi Zannoni has sent to Augsburg, probably. We don't know if he ever has been there. So that's what we can say for the Augsburg thing. Oh, I'm too fast. And afterwards, and probably in 1756, he may have come to Nuremberg, and he claims to have there been the director of the Bureau of Geographers and a member of the Cosmographical Society and even a professor of this society. What was he heading at in Nuremberg? What was he looking for there? Well, this is the Hohmann Publishing House, at least part of it. It's going further on to the left, so it's a really big and representative house in the center of the city. And the Hohmann Publishing House was by far the most important map publisher east of the Rhine and maybe north of the Alps. So he covered a major part of Europe, were supplied with maps by the Hohmann-Eyres. It was run by two halves, Hohmann-Eyres. One half was by Ebersberger and the other one was by Johann Michael Franz. There were more than 400 folio maps on this on sale, and they were produced in the building, from the manuscript maps to engraving to printing, partly the coloring outside. We'll come to this later on, and the selling. They had a shop down here at the ground floor, and you could even buy bound atlases there and could order them from abroad and so on. It was renowned as a map publisher for the cartography at an international standard. They had and they were associated with this Cosmographical Society. The Cosmographical Society was an idea of a couple of cartographers, all together associated with the Home and Airs publishing house. The head of it was Johann Michael Franz, owner of half of the firm, and the original cartographers were Hase. You can see here a map of Africa from 1737, and later on some others. But the basic idea was that one or two cartographers working on these maps, collecting all the data and so on, would, especially for Germany, would not be sufficient to get a more modern map. The base material was not enough. And therefore, they wanted to have a society. Well, actually, they wanted to have an academy, a state-funded academy for Germany, to get all these people together, to get all those material together, to collect the maps, the data, the surveying instruments, and so on. And therefore, Franz founded the Cosmographic Society as a private society, together with the Home and Airs firm, to promote the idea of the academy, state-funded. And therefore he employed Tobias Meyer, one of the most famous cartographers of the 18th century, which was quite a luxury thing for a publisher to employ a specialized cartographer. And they published exceedingly on what they wanted to do with the academy, what the program of it was, how different parts they should have. They published on how to produce the maps. For example, here you have a proof print of a map of Speyer, where many of the parts were still in manuscript, and at the top you can hardly read, of course. They put a lot of questions and sent it to someone in the country and said, are the borders true? Are the cities all marked on this thing, on the map? And it took another 5 years until the map really was published. So they invested a lot of time and money in publishing these maps, and that's what the Cosmographical Society wanted to do. They wanted to show how good they were in making maps. They published memoirs, at least a few, for example, for the map of Africa we have seen, for the map of Russia. And they had new ideas, such as Hase's historical atlas, which the first in the world was, that included medieval and modern time up to the contemporary history, and which included also areas outside the Mediterranean and Europe. So you can see here Muslim empires in the west of Africa, and you have maps of Chinese territories in this atlas, apart from other things. And they heavily promoted their idea of the Cosmographical Society, for example, by this Nouvel Atlas de la Société Cosmographique, which just included the best maps they had. This is no real atlas. It doesn't cover the whole of Europe, for example. It's just the best maps bound together and given as a presentation copy to the emperor, to the Prussian king, and so on, to convince them to give the money for the academy, which failed. Later on, in 1750, they started a scientific journal, which actually is a book, but only one volume was published. But it's I think about 200 pages long, and it includes a lot of information on new surveys, on new data, on different kinds of material related to cartography and geography of the time. But this also failed as to promote the academy. And to get some money, they tried to make some big globes, 90 centimeters in diameter. They haven't been realized. What they really did was a preview copy of globes in 13 centimeter diameter from Lowitz, which you can see here. What was at the end was part of the big globes, was about 10 or 12 gores, as you can see, half finished, which Lowitz made in Göttingen and which survived, for example, in our library in Berlin. And the big problem, and so they were very busy in to get the homonaires and their society at the top of the time. But in 1756, nothing of this was in Nuremberg anymore. They had all left before Rizzi Zannoni came there. The heyday were over. Franz, Tobias Meyer, and Lowitz had left Nuremberg for Göttingen and for the university. And the reason was that all these activities had cost so much money that Franz had debts in the height of 16,000 guilders, which amounts to a sales volume of about 130,000 Hohmann maps. And it's a miracle how the Hohmann firm survived these crises. And it showed up in between 1750 and 1755 that these financial problems would prevent Hohmann from going on like before with all this investment in high quality cartography. And Franz half of the firm in 1755 was put under the guidance of the debtors of his the creditors, sorry, not the debtors, of course. And so his half of the firm couldn't move anymore from that on. In 1759 he sold his whole half to his brother, who took over the debts from him, but this half couldn't do anything. The other one, by Ebersberger, was not involved in this. So he took the Cosmographic Society to Göttingen, but not the firm. And that's the situation Rizzi Zannoni found when he probably came to Nuremberg. And I think that explains a lot of what he did there. What was still in Nuremberg? Here you can see the output of new maps for the Hohmann firm, and you can see that a lot of publication during the first years under Johann Baptist Hohmann, the famous founder of the firm, and you have a lot of publication during the days of Franz and the Cosmographical Society. And just afterwards, where the red triangle is, where Rizzi Zannoni came, it dropped down to almost no publication sometimes. They had a lot of, they had some drawings still to publish, so it didn't drop down to zero at the immediately, but you can see, I think, the overall picture. What was still there? It was Ebersberger, 61 years old. He was an engraver. He was an instrument maker. This is one of his instruments he made. It was still a very busy publisher. They still printed maps in hundreds. Probably there was the cartographic archive of the firm, a collection of maps, the notes on topographical changes, on coordinates and things still there. And there was a man in charge of the geographical correspondence named Matthäus Ferdinand Knopf. And he himself supposed to be a great geographer. In fact, he was not. I think he was the worst cartographer the firm ever had. As a proof, we have this map where you have a mistake in the latitude of 5 degrees, which is not necessary in the middle of the 18th century, even for a, well, let's say, a non-professional cartographer wouldn't have to do this. It's an awful map, and he made some of these at least. So and this probably, as Rizzi sometimes later on said, he was the director of the Bureau of Geographers. He by far was who easily was the most knowledgeable geography at the time in Nuremberg, because the good ones had left, and persons like Knopf were still there. So this might be true. This might not be invented. So what might Ebersberger, who probably was the big man in the firm when Franz had left, ask the young man Rizzi Zannoni to do? Well, in 1756 we have the start of the 7 Years' War, and for the predecessor of this war, the War of Austrian Succession, they had in 1748 published a map, which, as you have probably seen outside in this nice exhibition, has a great resemblance to the first map Rizzi Zannoni published with Homenaires. I don't know if the Homenaires invented this. I'll have to check this. Otherwise, maybe one of you can help me. To have this seat of wars with a dense net of all these marches with dates for the different stages where they camped and where the battles took place. At least this is a predecessor to the map Rizzi Zannoni made for the War of the Austrian Succession, and I think it quite probably that Ebersberger said to Rizzi Zannoni, "We'd like to have this for the 7 years for the starting war now too. Please make this for us," because they had more than 400 maps already. So they were not in need of making a map of Scandinavia or things like that. Yeah. So they wanted him to do something special. It's all guess, of course, because we don't have any material providing this. And this is the map you have more than once seen here and outside that he did. And you can easily follow, well, not easily, because it's a whole mess when you look at the map. You have to have the textbook, which is outside and very rare, but it's on the internet too. And with the textbook, it's very interesting, because not only in the title it says that Rizzi Zannoni wrote the book, also the text itself, when you read it, pretends to be written by him, and it is in very good German. It's very lively to read. So either someone else helped very much, or he was very good in speaking German, because it's a difficult text. You have to tell someone. Prince Henry of Prussia was marching on the 5th of October from Jena to Gotha, and there he camped for 10 days, and the day afterwards he marched on to there, and in between the others were there. So it's not a novel. So it's easy. It's difficult to describe, but it's easy to read, and it's a very good German text. All the rest of the maps probably were published when Rizzi Zannoni was not in Nuremberg anymore. I think we agreed that he was in Paris at least from 1760 onwards, and the next map to be published was in 1762. The follow-up, we have seen it yesterday in your presentation already. It's just the same type of map and giving the next years of the wars of the 7 Years' War. What we have to bear in mind with the rest of the maps is that in 1759, Franz sold his half of the firm to his brother, and soon afterwards Ebersberger died. So there was no, and gave it on to some book publishers and his daughter. So there was no scientific program anymore in the firm. So they published very few maps, and just what they could get hold of. So in 1762, Rizzi Zannoni probably sent in a manuscript map for publication of Orléans in France. All the maps, I might like to stress, were sold to the end of the firm. We can still find them in the sales catalogue of 1824, and probably they were sold up to 1848. Probably not very many copies sold in 1848 of these maps, of course. This map was redrawn reworked in 1808. They erased the cartouches and added the new territorial organization to make the map more modern, but it usually didn't work very well. You could easily see that it is actually an old map, somehow reworked. So, the same year, Rizzi Zannoni's map of of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica was published, which is quite an extraordinary map, an unusual map, because usually the maps were oriented to the north, and this one is oriented in not exactly to north, to northeast. Then we have the map of France in 1764, and two maps of Swiss canton, which were drawn to the Atlas Helvetice, and I can't explain why 18 of the maps were drawn by Walser and 2 were drawn by Rizzi Zannoni. I have no idea why they split this in the way they did. And they were used in the Atlas up to the end of the firm. One thing to his idea. Well, he always said that on the maps he always gives his profession in a different way. At the first one, which was published probably in 1759, which he probably really drew when he was in Nuremberg, he says he's a collaborator of the Geographical Society, which I think might be true, because Franz from Göttingen must have shown up sometimes in Nuremberg, so he must have known him. So he must have got into contact with this Cosmographical Society somehow. The Cosmographical Society itself does never mention Rizzi Zannoni, as far as I know. So but they didn't publish anything substantial at the end of the 1750s anymore. In 1761, Franz died already. So he might have been in contact with this Cosmographical Society. In 1762, on the map of Sicily and so on, he even says that he is a professor in this Cosmographical Society. I have no explanation for this. This was probably wishful thinking. I can imagine that they were talking, when they talked about this Cosmographic Society, which probably impressed Rizzi Zannoni from the ideas they had. They were talking about the academy, and maybe then they had the idea of there should be a professor, more than one of the professors in the different sections, talking about surveying, talking about mapping, talking about geography as a whole, and these things about history, what they included. But nothing of this came into being. The whole society never had more than a handful of persons, all the friends of the firm and so on, not even in Göttingen. So this can't be explained. What he might have learned in Nuremberg is that a big publishing house consisted of as many maps as possible and sell them as long as you can to get the profit out of it. This graph shows the layers of old maps. The dark blue ones are still from Roman times. So you have the time from left to the right and the number of maps as the maps grew. What they had on sale in number grew. So they left. The only very few of the old ones were omitted. So they are still in 1755 about 15, 20 from the very old time, from the first 10 years of the Homan firm existed, and so on. And they had about 400 maps, a little more than 400 maps at the time, and this was a good stock to run such a company. I said and what he probably also learned, that you have to be careful with investing money in quality. I don't know if he adhered to this advice later on, but this was quite obvious when he was in Nuremberg. And he could, of course, have learned how a big map engraving business was run. I think I don't get into details here. The building of Homenair still exists. It's the City Museum of Nuremberg, so you can visit these rooms. And the back to 2/3 of this room were the printing presses. At least 2 of them were situated during the time Rizzi Zannoni was there. He could have learned how map engraving worked, and how to combine etching and burin work for the cartouches, for example. You can see that with the military map outside. The etched lines are very faint already, and those with the Bavarian are still black and easy to read in the cartouche. Reworking maps, if they faded away, this one is one of the... This is the only copy where you can see the reworking in progress. At the cartouche, some parts still faint, some parts already reworked. And they had probably had a complete system of colorists at their hand, some in the building, some outside, and they probably signed with dry stamps. You can hardly see them. There's a half moon in the right below the right-hand corner, and it does only make sense to have the colorists sign their work by things like this. We don't have archival material of this, but we can find out this. It still was a company selling maps all over Europe, either by shops associated with the company, where they, at least at 1750, it's a little earlier than Rizzi Zannoni and the crisis of the firm, was sold that with booksellers and print sellers almost over whole of Europe, apart from Western Europe. There were the French and the English cartography. And we had this traveling map vendors, map sellers, walking up to Constantinople and selling the maps in thousands altogether. What we also had is that he got into contact with the Göttingen Academy of Science, probably via Franz. I recently found out, but I couldn't check this anymore, that there is a letter to Abraham Gotthelf Kästner from the 1st of March 1763, who was active in the academy in Göttingen. Probably the letter has something to do with his membership in the academy, but I don't really know. I'll give you the details. Yeah, but as far as I checked the journal of the Göttingen Academy, and he published nothing between 1758 and 1772, so he was not very active in that academy. And I'm coming almost to the end. So we have the time of Paris is in between, and in 1776 he left Paris, and from Paris already it was agreed and organized with the Bavarian Academy of Science and the Bavarian State that he would help in, well, he would start this, I'd like to start like this. He would start the third attempt of the Bavarians to get a new land survey. They had already one started with Cassini, which didn't work because he had no time, and the surveys Cassini made in Bavaria were not good. And then they had tried it with a French military engineer, Michel, who made 2 maps, but the Bavarians said no, the names are not good, they're not Bavarian enough, and it costs too much money and so on, and they stopped the procedure. And in 1776 they asked Rizzi Zannoni to propose a new survey, and the specialist for this time of Bavarian cartography, Daniel Schlögl, said this was by far the best proposal for the survey. He said it will cost money, it will cost time and so on, and I think they would have accepted. But the problem was they had the idea to finance it by a subscription, and well, I think the tours that Rizzi Zannoni had made in Munich by the Bavarian instrument maker has something to do with this survey, but the subscription failed, so Rizzi Zannoni could go on to Italy and leave Germany. And this is one hand-drawn index sheet to the proposed map of Bavaria, and that's what he did, as far as we know, as far as we can assume, in Germany. Thank you.